After 35 years of quietly protecting millions of Americans from the darkness, a brilliant black woman is handcuffed by two brutal police officers in the middle of an empty street simply because she dared to bring kindness to underprivileged children. Has justice truly died? Or is this a dark conspiracy designed to silence those who dare stand against the evil in a society rife with injustice? In a quiet suburban area, about a 30-minute drive from the NSA headquarters, there lives a woman known to the neighbors only as Quiet Maya. They had no idea that this woman, Maya Jackson, was one of the top intelligence geniuses in America. At 35, Maya had no public profile, no social media presence, and no records outside a few faint traces in her tax files. She avoided attention, declined every invitation for community interaction, and lived as though her very existence needed to remain a secret. Each morning, Maya woke up at 5 a.m., brewed black coffee with no sugar, and then spent hours in a soundproofed room, the only space in her home equipped with signal filters. In that room, she monitored encrypted news feeds from dozens of surveillance systems ranging from the Middle East to Eastern Europe, from international banking networks to unusual signals in the tech investment world. To most people, these were meaningless data streams. To Maya, they were the lifeblood of the world, the place where she could feel the heartbeat of what was about to happen. Yet, perhaps the most surprising thing was not her job, but the reason she chose this life. Maya was born in Harwood County, a half-rural, half-urban town where poverty and despair didn't need an invitation. Her father died when she was just 8 years old in a scuffle with the police that no one bothered to investigate. Her mother, a cleaning woman, swallowed her tears and carried on, teaching her only daughter, "Never trust the system, but you still need to learn how to understand it." Those words ran deep in Maya's blood, becoming a compass for all her choices. From that moment on, she excelled in school, earning a full scholarship to MIT, and was recruited by the NSA before she was 25. But the further she advanced, the more she kept her identity hidden. For Maya, true power wasn't in having others know who you were. It was in making sure no one knew what you were capable of. And the world, even heads of state, had often relied on her to prevent silent crises. Yet Maya never saw herself as a hero. She was just a woman living in the shadows, using silence as a sharp blade and solitude as her armor. But all those layers of protection would begin to crack on a day that seemed no different from any other. A day when she planned to drive back to Harwood to conduct a cybersecurity workshop for a group of underprivileged black children. It was a day she never expected would turn her into the hunted, pulled over, humiliated, and handcuffed in front of a crowd as if she were the criminal. A day when the predator chose the wrong prey because they didn't know Maya Jackson is someone they should never have crossed. That morning, the sky was covered with a thin layer of lead-gray clouds, and the sunlight, unable to break through, was restrained by the cold mist of early spring. Maya started her car early, carrying a laptop case, a few network cables, and a neatly bound stack of documents, all for the brief session at the community center where she had grown up. Under the guise of a volunteer teacher, Maya had come here every month, quietly planting seeds of knowledge about digital safety in the children's minds, how to spot online scams, how to build a secure online identity, and sometimes sharing stories that only someone who had survived in an underground system like hers could truly understand. No accolades, no certificates, just a woman returning to her roots to ensure the children there didn't repeat the dangerous path she once walked. The silver Toyota rolled smoothly down Route 214, the road connecting the suburban Laurel area to the rural Prince George's County. On either side of the road were bare-branched trees, their tall, skinny trunks standing like silent figures watching. Maya turned on the AM radio to catch the news. The announcer mentioned a recent privacy violation scandal, but Maya felt no surprise. The tech and intelligence world had never been entirely clean. She knew that better than anyone. Her right hand held an insulated coffee cup, taking small sips. She wasn't tired, wasn't in a hurry, but there was something different about today. As the car turned onto the narrow road leading to her old neighborhood, Maya instinctively slowed down. It wasn't fear but an indescribable feeling, a sense of alertness as though she had just stepped into a monitored zone. The road was empty, no cars coming the other way, no sirens, no movement from the houses lining the street. Only the hum of her engine, steady and cold. From the rearview mirror, Maya caught a glimpse of a white patrol car turning from a distance, following the same route. She didn't think much of it at first. Police cars were common. But when she turned left onto the narrower stretch with a lower speed limit, the patrol car turned as well. A few hundred meters later, when she slowed down to avoid a pothole, the police car unexpectedly closed the distance. Maya glanced at the mirror again, her brows furrowed slightly. She was all too familiar with being watched, whether by allies or enemies. So that look in the mirror no longer frightened her like it would most people. But what unsettled her was this. This road was normally empty, and the community center was nearly 10 miles from the nearest police station. So why was a lone cruiser following her? A small flicker of unease crept into her chest, but she kept her hands steady on the wheel, kept her breathing even, and refused to let herself appear out of the ordinary. Little did she know, that short drive was about to open the door to a nightmare. The police lights flashed on, the red and blue hues reflected off her dashboard. The loudspeaker crackled from behind. Pull over to the right immediately. Maya didn't hit the brakes right away. She took a deep breath, her eyes scanning her surroundings. There were no surveillance cameras on this stretch of road, no pedestrians, an ideal place if someone wanted to stage something. The red and blue lights flashed across the windshield like flashing knives, each flicker leaving a jagged sound echoing in Maya's chest. She eased the car to the side of the road, pulled the handbrake gently, and turned off the engine. The hum of the motor faded, but her heart rate began to accelerate. It wasn't fear. Maya had been through too many dangerous missions to feel fear now. But the intuition of someone who lived in the shadows whispered that something was wrong. Two figures stepped out from the cruiser behind her. Their police uniforms immediately caught her eye, but they didn't bring a sense of safety. Instead, they made her shiver. The first man was tall, broad-shouldered, like a dark shadow covering half the sky behind the car. He moved slowly, deliberately, like a hunter preparing to finish off prey cornered in its final moments. His shaved head reflected the flashing lights, his eyes squinting as if searching for every little detail. That was Officer Hayes. The second officer was shorter but moved faster, his eyes constantly darting back and forth as though scanning the surroundings. He was Officer Rivera. Neither of them seemed to have the confused look of a random traffic stop. They walked toward her as if they already knew exactly who she was, or, at the very least, had intended to target her from the start. Maya kept both hands on the wheel. She didn't reach for her wallet, didn't shuffle through papers, made no further movements. Every action could be twisted, she knew that all too well. From the rearview mirror, she watched Rivera silently walk toward the back of the car while Hayes approached the driver's side window. Instead of tapping lightly, he rapped 3 sharp, forceful knocks with his knuckle, more of a command than a request. Maya rolled down the window. The outside air was colder than she'd expected, but it was Hayes's gaze that truly sent a chill through her. It was a look devoid of any kindness, cold and contemptuous, as if he had already decided she was guilty, as if her mere presence here was an affront to the power he believed he wielded. "Good morning, officer," Maya said, her voice steady, soft but unwavering. Hayes didn't respond immediately. He scanned the interior of the car, his gaze betraying scrutiny. "Where are you headed this early?" he asked, his tone lazy though still laced with suspicion. "To the community center. I'm teaching some kids about internet safety," Maya replied, maintaining a calm, even pace. She didn't clarify who she was, didn't present any authority, but neither did she show any weakness. Rivera had now positioned himself behind her, seemingly checking the license plate, but Maya could clearly see in the mirror his gaze was scanning the trunk. No polite requests, no questions. Every movement was rushed, impatient, and notably seemed rehearsed. Hayes extended his hand. Driver's license and registration. Maya calmly retrieved her wallet from the glove compartment and handed it over without any sudden motions. He took it, glanced over it quickly, then looked at her again. "Do you know you were speeding?" "Speeding?" Hayes barked, his voice sharp and accusing, without any need for evidence. Dismissing the dash cam footage or the speed limit clearly posted less than 100 meters away. Maya tilted her head slightly, maintaining her usual calm demeanor, but deep inside, a tidal wave of tension was beginning to rise. She knew her car had only been traveling 2 miles above the speed limit. a common and usually overlooked mistake, one that even a decent traffic officer wouldn't bother with. But for Hayes, this wasn't about the law. It was an excuse, a cheap excuse snatched up to begin a well-rehearsed act of humiliation. "I'm sorry, officer, sir. I don't believe I was speeding," Maya replied, her voice steady, but her grip on the steering wheel tightening. Every word was measured carefully because she understood in this situation. The truth had no weight if the listener wasn't willing to hear it. Hayes smiled, but it wasn't the smile of someone maintaining public order. It was the grin of someone relishing the power they held, knowing no one would stop them. Officer Rivera, on the other hand, stood silently by the back of Maya's car, leaning slightly against the trunk as if waiting for some kind of signal. His gaze didn't shift much, but there was a chilling emptiness in his eyes, an indifference that Maya had seen before in intelligence reports about torture and coerced confessions. It didn't need words. It was the silence that made Maya shudder, the silent complicity where kindness wasn't just scorned but viewed as weakness that needed to be crushed. Maya didn't move. She noticed the tension in her chest didn't stem from fear, but from a seething anger that had been suppressed. Part of her wanted to speak out, to immediately point out the absurdity of the accusation. But the other part understood clearly. Every word she spoke, every defiant glance, could be twisted into non-cooperation, and just like that, they'd have their justification to push even further. Hayes examined her license again, then shook his head as though he'd uncovered something significant. "You live near Fort Meade?" he asked, his tone casual, as though making small talk. Maya didn't respond right away. The question, seemingly random, was actually a calculated test. Fort Meade was the location of the NSA headquarters, and the question, asked too early, too accurately, made Maya realize this wasn't a coincidence. She had been targeted, and not for a traffic violation. She nodded slightly. "I live in Laurel." True enough, but vague. The answer made Hayes furrow his brow. He wanted more. She, on the other hand, retreated deeper into the protective shell she had honed over the years. Maya didn't know exactly how much they knew, but one thing was certain. They were playing a game with loaded dice. A cold gust of wind brushed past, tugging at Rivera's coattails. He silently stepped closer, saying nothing, simply staring at Maya with an empty gaze, as though she wasn't a person but a target chosen because of her history, her skin color, and her isolation. Injustice didn't need to shout. It seeped through every gesture, every look, and now it was enveloping Maya like a heavy, cold blanket, suffocating and unrelenting. The red and blue lights continued to flash behind her. No one on the road, no one to witness. Alone, helpless, and angry, Maya remained still, but inside, her heart was screaming. She knew this was the beginning of an orchestrated injustice, and it wouldn't stop with this absurd accusation. It would go further, testing her limits, pushing her into a corner where, if she wasn't strong enough, she would be crushed, just like so many others who had been silenced and buried under the weight of the system. Maya kept her breath steady, just enough to prevent the anger from boiling over. But then, in an instant, Officer Hayes abruptly turned and walked toward the back of the car, where Rivera was crouched low, half of his body disappearing into the open trunk. Maya knew things didn't happen by accident. Everything unfolding had a purpose, a plan behind it. And just seconds later, Rivera's voice rang out, loud enough for Maya to hear, but void of any surprise. Only a blatant, feigned tone. "Hey Hayes, look at this." A tight knot formed in Maya's stomach. She felt it, the shift in the air, a signal that something was about to change. Her body went on high alert, blood rushing to her heart, her mind spiraling through 100 possibilities. She had never carried anything illegal, especially today when her only goal was to teach a basic cybersecurity class. She didn't even have any NSA materials with her, just a few cables, a clean USB, and an encrypted laptop with all sensitive data wiped. So what could it be? Hayes returned, holding a small, clear zip bag containing an unfamiliar white powder. The reflection of the police lights made it gleam like an accusation ready to be framed. He held it up in front of her face as if it were undeniable proof of a crime she couldn't refute. She didn't recognize it. She had no idea what it was. She looked straight at the bag, calm, unwavering, and said slowly, "I've never seen that before. You're making this up." Rivera remained silent, standing behind Hayes like a shadow, his arms crossed, a slight smirk playing at the corner of his mouth. The coordination between these two men was flawless. This wasn't just surveillance. She was the focal point of a plan, and that bag was the main prop. Hayes didn't argue. He took a half step back, reciting like he was reading from a script. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Maya cut him off immediately, her voice cold and firm. I want to call my lawyer. But that statement was worthless because just then, the dry snap of handcuffs rang out. Her right wrist was yanked behind her, followed by her left. The cold steel clamped down tight and unforgiving, numbing her skin. Maya felt her wrist twist slightly, the pain searing, but the humiliation didn't come from the roughness of the action. It came from the attitude. They didn't see her as a person. She was just a body to be controlled and imposed upon. At that moment, a few cars began to slow down from the opposite side of the road. An elderly couple in a pickup truck glanced over, their eyes empty before turning away. A young man on a bicycle stopped for a moment, watching as Maya was led away, but showed no expression other than indifference. No one asked what was going on. No one questioned. They simply saw a black woman in handcuffs and assumed she had done something wrong. For Maya, that moment felt like her whole life was being torn apart. She had lived long enough within the system to know that an unjust accusation, if not exposed in time, could become a sentence. And now, in the familiar streets where she had grown up, she was being dragged away like a criminal. No real evidence, no chance to defend herself, only the cold metal of the cuffs and a predetermined charge meant to force her into silence. Maya didn't lower her head, even as the pain from her wrist spread throughout her body. A fire began to ignite within her. They thought they had caught weak prey. They didn't know they had just touched the tip of an iceberg, and only the surface was visible. She wouldn't be silent. Not ever. Another success. Hayes smirked, his eyes flicking over to Rivera as though the two of them had just completed a familiar performance. There was no justice in his voice, no righteousness, only the cheap satisfaction of those two accustomed to turning innocent people into criminals in order to embellish their own records. And this time, their target was Maya Jackson, a woman who had never broken a single law, a brilliant mind using her kindness to quietly contribute to her community. But that didn't matter to them. To people like Hayes, kindness was just an opportunity to trample over others without fear of retaliation. Maya was dragged through the flashing lights, her wrists bound behind her with cold steel cuffs. She walked with her back straight, showing no sign of pain, but each step felt like walking on the broken remnants of her pride. The patrol car door slammed open with a harsh clunk. Rivera bent down, holding Maya's head as per procedure, but the grip was unnecessarily tight. "Watch your head," he muttered, but there was no real concern in his eyes. It wasn't a warning, it was mockery. Across the street, a few bystanders began to gather. A middle-aged woman in a nurse's uniform, having just finished her shift, stood watching, her shopping bag in hand. A college student with a backpack was probably recording a video, but no one intervened. No one asked who Maya was or what was happening. They simply saw a black woman in handcuffs being shoved into a police car, and their minds immediately defaulted to, she must have done something wrong. Maya felt their gazes pierce through her jacket, through her skin, like needles of prejudice jabbed into her bones. She wanted to scream, to tell them all, "I'm the one protecting this country, the one teaching your children how to protect themselves from harm. I'm not a criminal." But she remained silent, not because she was afraid, but because she understood. In this world, the voice of a black woman is never truly heard when she stands in a scene already scripted for her condemnation. The car door slammed shut behind her, the outside world blocked off by the hazy glass. Maya leaned against the hard seat, her hands clenched so tightly in the cuffs that they began to tingle. On the floor of the car lay a dried patch of mud from the previous patrol, next to a crumpled piece of paper. She didn't feel pain in her body, but deep inside, her dignity felt like it was being torn apart, not because of the cuffs, but because of the public humiliation before a society that was all too used to turning a blind eye. "You know," Rivera's voice came from the front seat, not turning to face her. "Most people who get arrested start with the words, 'I'm innocent.'" Hayes chuckled. The sound of his laughter echoed in the car like metal scraping against stone, cold, hollow, and cruel. Maya closed her eyes, but her mind didn't stop. The memories of her father, the man who had been beaten to death in a misunderstanding with the police, with no one ever held accountable, came flooding back like shattered glass. As a child, she had been powerless to save him. But now, if she let herself be buried under this unjust accusation, she would be betraying not only him, but also the children she had been trying to protect with knowledge and trust. The anger inside her didn't explode into words. It silently spread through her body like underground lava, simmering, burning hot. They thought she would bow her head, stay quiet, accept this humiliation like hundreds, thousands of others had been forced to endure. But Maya Jackson was not an anonymous, solitary person. They didn't know who she was, and soon they would pay for that mistake. The Harwood County Police Station sat tucked behind a dilapidated warehouse, quietly, almost as if it too were ashamed of what was happening inside. When the patrol car came to a stop, Rivera yanked the rear door open and practically dragged Maya out, pulling her with force despite her wrists still being shackled tightly. His eyes never met hers, as if she didn't even exist as a person. She was just another task to complete, another familiar routine carried out hundreds of times with those who had no voice, a process painted with the word security, but really fueled by disdain. She stepped into the station's main hallway, where the fluorescent lights buzzed, casting a sickly white glow onto the gray tile floor. The air was thick with the smell of metal, old ink, and something damp, like years of sweat absorbed into the walls. She didn't scream, didn't struggle, didn't say a word, but that calmness only irritated them further. For people like Hayes and Rivera, they needed a reason to bring her down, needed an excuse to make her into the resistor. And when there was no clear behavior to accuse, they'd create one. "Put your fingers here," a desk officer instructed, taking over from Rivera, gloved hands moving mechanically, his eyes indifferent. Maya was led to the fingerprinting station, the black ink thickly printed on the tips of her fingers, as if drawing a line between freedom and confinement. Everything that belonged to her, the reputation, the clean record, the job, was erased by that ink. She was fingerprinted like a real criminal, with no resistance, but each press of her fingers onto the glass felt like a knife cutting into her own honor. When it came time for her mug shot, another officer snapped his fingers, signaling her to look at the camera. "Look here. Don't blink." Maya stared straight into the lens, her eyes unwavering. No anger, no panic, just something quieter, the pain of betrayal. The flash lit up the room, freezing her image on the screen labeled suspect. But who would label the injustice? After the procedure, she was led down a narrow hallway into the holding area. On the walls, hastily scrawled graffiti, names, curses, and scribbled lines like, "I'm innocent," scratched out with sharp objects stood as silent testimonies of the hundreds of victims before her. The heavy iron door to the cell slammed open. Rivera shoved her inside with no explanation, then slammed it shut with a sharp clang. She was locked up with two other women, one dozing off, head drooped to her chest, the other staring blankly at the far wall. No one spoke. No one asked who she was. Everyone knew. Here, your name didn't matter. What mattered was what you were accused of. And Maya, according to the report in front of the officer on duty, was listed under possession of illegal substances, with the added note, resisting arrest during search. Maya froze. She didn't scream, didn't struggle, didn't resist. Never had she. But in the records, the story was different. A simple line saying, "resisting an officer," was enough to cast doubt on any defense she might try to offer later. She understood. They didn't need to be right. They only needed to write it down. And from that moment, the entire system would run on their words, not the truth. Sitting in the corner of the cell, Maya felt the cold cement bench seep through her shirt. But what was colder was the wave of helplessness flooding her chest. She, the woman who had once written strategies to stop international espionage, the one who had led covert operations where a single line of code could cause a national security collapse, was now locked away like a street-level drug dealer. No one knew who she was. No one believed her. And that made the invisible audience want to scream for her. The air in the cell was thick with the scent of old sweat, rusted metal, and nameless, unrelenting resignation. The ceiling was low, and the cold light from a single round bulb overhead cast harsh shadows on the cement floor. marred by countless scuff marks from shoes trudging across it. Maya sat in the farthest corner, her back pressed against the rough wall, her head slightly bowed, but her gaze remained steadfast, unwavering. She was silent, unnoticed, not a single soul calling her name, not a single word of concern. To the others, she was just another black woman locked up for some familiar crime. But in her mind, a storm of memories raged. By now, she should have been standing in that damp classroom at the community center where 17 children were waiting. Every month, she brought her old laptop, refurbished from her office, to teach them how to search for information safely, how to recognize online scams, how to dream of a future unbound by poverty or prejudice. She had never told them the truth about her real job. She wasn't allowed to. But in the eyes of those children, Maya was the first person who made them believe that knowledge could save them. And now, while they waited for her to open the door to their class, she was locked in a room that hadn't even appeared in her worst nightmares. Her kindness, the very thing that had driven her to travel long distances, the thing that pushed her to hide her advanced knowledge behind a gentle face, was being shattered. Not with whips or chains, but with a cold, uncaring system, a handcuff, a false statement on the report, a look of contempt. And the entire essence of who she was, the value she had built, was immediately discarded as if she had never existed. Maya tilted her head to the right, pressing her cheek against the cool wall as though trying to balance the shame and the rising fury inside her. Tears welled up in the corners of her eyes, not from fear, but from a deep, aching pain, the sense of betrayal by the very system she had once believed could be fixed from within. She had once thought that if she was smart enough, quiet enough, and proper enough, she could slip into the cracks of injustice and change it from the inside. But now, that system didn't care who she was. It only needed a face to use as an example, and that face today was hers. She closed her eyes, trying to keep her breath steady. No crying. Not now. Not in front of them. Because Maya Jackson had never let anyone see her tears, not even in the most intense meetings at the NSA where decisions shaped the national security of a country. She had fought too hard to get here, and she wouldn't let them crush her so easily. She thought of the children once more. She thought of Damon, the shy boy who was the best coder in the class, who had once told her, "You make me believe I can do something big." Maya opened her eyes. The fire inside her hadn't gone out. It was only buried under a temporary layer of ash. Her kindness might be buried, but she would dig it up herself. The door to the cell creaked open with a dry, agonizing sound, signaling the arrival of someone in power. A duty officer peeked inside, not calling her name, not asking how she was, simply saying in a cold tone, "One call. Hurry up." His voice was devoid of emotion, but it carried a clear sense of contempt and dominance, as if Maya's only right in that moment was to exist for a few more minutes. Maya stood slowly, her knees stiff from sitting too long on the cold stone bench. She nodded wordlessly, then followed the officer down a narrow hallway bathed in the dim, yellowish light. Each step she took felt like it was pounding into her mind with 1,000 questions. Who could she trust? Should she risk revealing who she truly was to protect herself? Or should she keep it all hidden and accept the suffocation of her honor? This call, just one, was the only bridge between her and freedom, or the final cut that would divide her life forever. The phone booth was a small, empty space next to the holding area, housing only an old landline phone with a coiled cord hanging like a noose ready to tighten around someone's neck. Maya was uncuffed, but still watched through the frosted glass. She walked toward the phone, her hand trembling slightly as she lifted the receiver, but her gaze sharpened with the same precision she had once commanded in high-level counterintelligence operations. She didn't have time to hesitate. She couldn't call a lawyer. The window was too narrow, and no one would understand the unique situation she was in. She couldn't call her family. They had no idea what she truly did, and they had no power to intervene. She needed to call the one person who not only understood the system, but knew exactly who she was. The one who had once sworn to stand behind her if the world turned its back. Maya dialed the familiar number, a special encrypted number embedded in her mind, never stored in any device, reserved for absolute emergencies. The phone rang twice, then a deep, tense voice answered, "Hello." She took a deep breath. "James, it's me." "Maya." A brief silence followed. then a noticeable change in his breath. James Carter's voice dropped, compressed with the familiar weariness Maya had heard during their covert intelligence meetings. "Maya? What's going on?" Her voice quivered slightly, but she maintained perfect accuracy in every word. "I was arrested this morning. Harwood County Police. They set me up. There was a bag of white powder in my car. I've never seen it. They're charging me with resisting an officer. James, they're framing me." The line went silent again. She could hear the faint tapping of keys, followed by an exasperated, "Damn it." Maya knew he was checking the system, trying to find out what was going on. "Did you use your real name?" James asked quietly, his tension rising. "Not yet. I haven't revealed who I am," she replied. "I can't. If my identity leaks into the custody records, the entire system will go into chaos. International intelligence channels will need to restructure, and I won't be able to operate anymore." James sighed deeply, the sound thick with frustration. "Listen, you did the right thing. You absolutely cannot reveal your rank or position. Let me handle this." Maya glanced toward the frosted glass. The officer still stood there, arms crossed, his posture lazy but his eyes full of suspicion. She leaned in, lowering her voice even further. "I need you to approach from the outside. Don't reveal anything. I can hold on for a few days, but they won't stop." James didn't need to hear more. "I'll have someone come. A legal team. Not through the NSA channels. I'll make sure you're out as quickly as possible. Stay still. Don't say anything more. Don't call anyone else." "James," Maya whispered. "Thank you for believing in me." "Always," he replied. "And Maya, whatever they're targeting you for, I'll find the person behind it." The call ended. Maya placed the receiver down gently, as if it were a bomb that hadn't yet exploded. Her heart was still racing, but for the first time since the morning, there was a glimmer of light inside her. Hope. It wasn't because she had just called a colleague. It was because she had just contacted the deputy director of the NSA, the only person in the world who wasn't just a friend, but also the sole living witness who knew the truth. Maya Jackson never broke the law. And if anyone dared fabricate charges against her, they were about to face a truth they couldn't control. In a high-security office deep within the underground complex of the NSA, the light was never warm enough. Screens flickered with continuous streams of data, lines of code, and network maps stretching across the cold walls, just like the atmosphere itself, precise, rigid, and unforgiving. James Carter, 50 years old, with salt and pepper hair and a solid yet discreet build beneath his charcoal suit, stood motionless before a screen displaying an internal report from local law enforcement. His gray-brown eyes were fixed on a name that appeared beneath a blurry photo of Maya. Suspect Maya Jackson. Charges: possession of illegal substances, resisting arrest. His hands rested behind his back, tightening slightly, veins popping faintly under the cuffs of his shirt. He understood Maya better than anyone at the agency. Not only was he the deputy director at the NSA, but he had also personally recruited and mentored her. He was also the only friend she had left from their days as young analysts writing reports deep in a basement without windows. James had seen Maya collapse from exhaustion before, heard her speak of her father, the man beaten to death by police for refusing to bow his head. And now he saw her arrested by the very system she had dreamed of changing from within. An officer entered, handing him a file. James didn't turn around. "Any word from the mobile surveillance system?" he asked, his voice low and cold. No traffic cameras recorded the moment Maya was pulled over. The route she took was completely out of the surveillance range, almost like someone deliberately picked that spot. James nodded slightly. In his mind, the pieces were starting to fit together, not from emotion, but from the instinct of someone who had lived his entire life in the shadows. If Maya was arrested, if there was evidence found, and if the charges were as blatantly absurd as they appeared, this was no accident. This was a target, and Maya was the prey. He walked to his desk, opening his personal laptop, the one used only for the most sensitive cases. James's fingers slid over the encryption layers, then paused at an interagency information analysis system. He entered the names: Officer Hayes, Officer Rivera. The system returned results in less than 3 seconds, but what made him frown were the strange gaps. Internal investigation reports wiped clean, complaints filed with no conclusive notes, and a series of bank accounts with regular monthly cash transactions from a shady real estate company in Baltimore. James hit a key hard. The screen switched to a map connecting the data. Red lines appeared. An underground network organized with financial ties and protected by inside hands. "Damn it," he muttered, then pressed a button for an internal call. "Prepare an emergency meeting with Counterintelligence Unit 3 immediately." The phone on his desk rang. He picked it up. Legal Processing Center reports Maya made a call. She hasn't disclosed her true identity yet, but they've noticed unusual reactions in her file. They might suspect she's not a regular person. James gripped the receiver tightly. His voice dropped like an electric current, tightening the space around him. "I'll handle it." He hung up, not wasting a second. For him, this wasn't just a wrongful arrest. This was a direct assault on one of the smartest, most resilient women at the NSA, someone the outside world might not know. But within the agency, she was a pillar. If she fell, the entire structure of national security would tremble in ways no one could foresee. James pulled out the encrypted phone, entered the 3-layer code, and called a senior contact at the Department of Justice. "I need 2 civil attorneys with experience in manipulated cases. Don't let anyone know they've been assigned by the NSA, and they need to be in Harwood County within 4 hours." After hanging up, he sat down, his gaze drifting toward the photo of Maya and him discreetly placed in his drawer. In the picture, they were both smiling brightly at an international conference, both dressed in suits, holding fake ID badges. He took a slow breath. "Maya, you're stronger than they ever knew. But this time, let me take the lead." Hope began to flicker, but the sky still remained clouded. Because if this was the real hunt, then Maya wasn't the only prey, and James Carter was ready to step into the battle, not just to save, but to root out the very core of the threat. The afternoon in Harwood County descended with a heavy, suffocating weight typical of quiet suburbs. The sky was blanketed by a layer of leaden clouds, as though it too was trying to suppress its own fury. A sleek black SUV pulled up smoothly in front of the police station. No sirens, no government plates. Every trace of authority concealed. The door opened, and James Carter stepped out. His graphite-colored coat wrapped his sturdy frame, and James looked like just another legal agent handling an internal case. But inside, he was a whirlwind. His cold, calculating eyes scanned the front of the station where Maya Jackson, the strongest woman he'd ever known, had just endured humiliating hours without a word of defense. He entered the lobby. A young officer sat behind the front desk, eyes glued to his computer screen, but his hand immediately dropped the box of donuts when he saw James. No badge shown, no raised voice. "I need to see Officers Hayes and Rivera." "Now," James said, his voice steady, though beneath it was an undercurrent that made the air feel suddenly thick. Less than 5 minutes later, in a small meeting room down a back hallway, the dim yellow light cast shadows on 3 figures. Hayes lounged in a chair, legs propped up, sneering as if entertaining a local lawyer they could easily overpower. Rivera stood with his arms crossed, leaning against the wall, eyes indifferent, as if waiting for James to accuse them so they could strike back. "This is a case you should stay out of," Hayes spoke first, cutting to the point. "She was caught with drugs and resisting arrest. It's clear as day." James didn't respond immediately. He opened the file bag and pulled out a photo. Maya standing in the middle of a community center classroom, holding up a whiteboard with the words "Anti-Online Fraud" written across it, children surrounding her, smiling brightly. He placed the photo on the table, sliding it quietly toward Hayes. "Do you know where she was headed that morning?" James asked, his voice calm. Hayes glanced at the photo and scoffed. "So what? Who knows? Teach kids in the morning, deal drugs in the afternoon. Everyone has 2 sides." James's hand tightened slightly under the table. He'd heard many false accusations, witnessed attacks done in the name of justice, but never had they been aimed at someone he trusted completely. He looked Hayes square in the eye. "I'm not here to argue. I'm here to warn you." Rivera chuckled. "Warn me? Who do you think you are?" James cut him off. "I'm the only one at the federal level who knows for certain that she doesn't carry any illegal substances. And I'm the only one with the power to dig through every paper trail, every financial transaction within your department." The atmosphere in the room changed immediately. Hayes sat up straight. Rivera went silent. Both began to understand that the man before them wasn't just a lawyer or a friend of the suspect. He was part of something much larger, power that didn't need to scream, but could make entire departments disappear from the internal map in a single night. James stood up, his gaze still fixed on them. "You've picked the wrong person," he said slowly, each word like a command carved into stone. "Maya Jackson saved over 30 lives in an operation that you're not even cleared to know about. She's the reason the entire national network infrastructure didn't collapse in 2019. And she is someone who does not deserve to be pulled out of a car, handcuffed in the street like an animal by two men who don't even understand what they're stepping on." Hayes's lips tightened, his eyes beginning to waver. Rivera turned his head away, his jaw twitching. James walked out of the room without looking back. He didn't need to wait for their response. He knew from this moment on. They had felt the storm approaching, and this time, it wasn't coming from a lone woman, but from the entire truth they had tried to hide in the shadows for too long. The office was bathed in the dim glow of the late afternoon as the firewall system clicked shut after the fifth layer of authentication. On the screen, a clear image of the white powder bag captured by Harwood County Police came into focus. Its angled shot under neon light revealed a small detail that they likely hadn't noticed, a laser-etched code subtly hidden along the edge of the nylon bag. James zoomed in on the image, his eyes narrowed as the code became legible. NTX 47K3. To anyone outside the intelligence community, it would have looked like a meaningless string of characters. But to James, and anyone who had worked within national security, it was like a silent bomb had just detonated. He immediately stood up from his chair. NTX was the prefix marking a batch of items from the NSA's temporary evidence vault, typically used for training or as sample material for internal threat detection exercises. Every sample bag in the vault was marked with its own unique code, traceable to the exact time, person, and purpose for which it was used. Items like this never left the system without high-level approval. So how could a bag marked with an internal NSA code end up in Maya's car? James quickly accessed the inventory system. The command ran in less than 4 seconds before the system responded. The bag with the code NTX 47K3 was recorded as being in Vault K23. Status: sealed, unauthorized to move. Last update: 1 month ago. No retrieval request. No reports of loss. Theoretically, the bag had never left the center. A chill ran down his spine. Either the system had been compromised, or someone inside, someone with access, had intentionally taken the bag and hidden any trace, as if it had never gone missing. Both possibilities were dangerous, but the worst part was that Maya, the one person holding the most sensitive intelligence on the country, was the target. He immediately opened the internal network interface. The list of employees with access to Vault K23 consisted of only 6 individuals. Among them, 2 names stood out. Both had been temporarily suspended 3 years ago in a classified investigation involving internal data leaks and suspected connections to an underground network selling encrypted information abroad. The investigation had ended without enough evidence to press charges, and everyone involved had been instructed to remain silent. James dropped into his chair, his palms pressed to his face. It wasn't fear he felt. It was the awareness of a brutal truth. Maya's arrest wasn't just police overreach. It wasn't simply discrimination. It was part of a deeper, more sophisticated plot that had likely been seeded years ago. Someone, maybe inside the NSA, wanted to take Maya down, not just to harm her, but to silence her, to shift public opinion, or worse, to remove her from the game before she discovered something far larger. He typed in the final commands, activating the Nightstorm Protocol, a high-level surveillance program for cases that involve potential intelligence leaks tied to an insider. All of Maya's contacts in the past 6 months were immediately compiled for analysis. A map appeared, dots connected by thin lines like a spider's web. But then James noticed something unusual. Over the last 2 weeks, Maya had been under surveillance, not by the local police, but by an unidentified unit using a set of intermediary tracking signals connected through 3 countries via IP relay. And if that's the case, then perhaps today's trap wasn't of Hayes and Rivera's making. It was merely the final step in a plan that had been orchestrated a long time ago, with a single objective: to bring Maya down from within the very organization she had devoted her life to. James stood up. There was no longer confusion in his eyes, only a simmering rage contained to the brink. Someone inside this system had just made the biggest mistake of their life. touching Maya and leaving a trail. He grabbed the phone, connecting to a high-security contact. His voice was as cold as steel. Initiate an internal sweep. Target anyone who has accessed Vault K23. Revoke their access immediately. We have an insider, and I'll drag them out of the shadows. The first trial began in a courtroom that felt stifling, heavy, as if a thick gray cloud hung above everyone's heads, pressing down on them. The low ceiling and harsh white lights above seemed designed to expose the truth, but the truth in this room was not something anyone cared about. The heavy door creaked open, and Maya entered, the sound of cold iron chains clinking as she walked. Her wrists were still shackled, despite the fact that no legal procedure required this for someone with no criminal record, no violent behavior. But that didn't matter to them. What they needed was the image of a black woman walking into the courtroom, appearing as a criminal. Whispers started from the rows behind her. A woman in glasses leaned in, whispering to her companion, "Is that the one from yesterday's news?" A young man in an unfamiliar suit pulled out his phone, trying to discreetly take a picture. The eyes that turned toward Maya were not filled with sympathy. They were filled with curiosity, schadenfreude, or indifference. No one mentioned the class she had missed that morning. No one spoke of the children waiting for her with eager eyes at the community center. All of that was forgotten. Instead, all that remained was a solitary, damning label, defendant. The prosecutor stepped forward, his voice booming, cold and measured, as if honed through hundreds of prior cases. "Your Honor, the defendant, Maya Jackson, was arrested with a significant quantity of illegal substances found in her private vehicle. Clear physical evidence. She refused to cooperate and showed resistance to law enforcement. This is a serious matter." Each word was like a hammer pounding on the name Maya Jackson, pounding away everything she had worked for. No counter-evidence, no one to defend her. And the bitter truth was, Maya couldn't even defend herself. Because if she revealed who she truly was, the world would crumble along with her. Her identity would be exposed, covert operations would be compromised, and hundreds of people working in the shadows would be revealed. She clenched her fists under the table, her fingers numb from the tightness of the handcuffs. Her appointed lawyer, Carlson, an older man with a weary face and eyes that had long since grown accustomed to defeat, tried to argue with a weary tone, mentioning lack of objective evidence, no camera footage from the scene, and a clean personal record. But his words sank into the room like stones thrown into a deep well. No echo, no impact. On the other side, the prosecutor flipped through the files as if checking a stock list. Without hesitation, he declared, "We will be seeking the maximum penalty, as this is a clear indication of trafficking, not just simple possession." Some people in the room were taken aback. Maya gave a dry inward smile. This wasn't just about silencing her. They wanted to destroy her. They were setting up an entire play to crush one person. The climax of her outrage came when the prosecutor finished his statement with a chilling sentence. "She is a threat to the community. Her presence does not serve the public interest. She must be removed." Maya's heart tightened, not from the accusation, but from the phrase, "threat to the community." The community she had spent her entire life protecting. The community where she spent hours outside of work to teach children, advising the elderly on online safety, fixing computers for schools with her own money, even refusing a salary raise so there would be more funds for the center. And now, with a single false statement, they twisted her into the exact opposite. In Maya's eyes, the anger had surpassed the boiling point, but she didn't shout. She didn't cry. She didn't pound the table. Because she knew any sign of instability, any act of defiance, would be noted down and tagged with the label aggressive, and the play would proceed exactly as they wanted. She sat there, back straight, her eyes burning, not from hope, but from willpower. They had set up this trial believing she was weak. They didn't know that this very moment, when her goodness was suffocated by handcuffs and her honor trampled into the mud, was when something else would rise. Not resistance, but the flame of a reversal. The court proceeded to the prosecution's testimony, and Officer Hayes stepped up to the witness stand with the air of someone who had performed this role many times before. His gaze flicked toward Maya with a smug satisfaction, as if he already knew the outcome of the trial. The defendant was aggressive, shouting, and when I asked to search the vehicle, she resisted. "She struck me on the shoulder when I opened the car door," he said clearly, every word deliberate, each syllable rehearsed. It was as if this false report had been written long ago, a script memorized by heart. Maya clenched her hands tightly to suppress the anger burning within. Every breath she took seemed to carry the artificial stench of a legal farce orchestrated by those who cared nothing for the truth. The judge, a man with a cold gray face and no expression, sat motionless above them, his eyes never leaving the case file, completely ignoring Maya. Every time Hayes lied, the judge did not interrupt, did not question, did not ask for additional evidence. And for a brief moment, Maya caught the judge's eyes flicking toward the prosecutor, a glance full of silent understanding, a tacit agreement. She understood instantly. This courtroom was not a place where justice was served. It was a place where it was strangled quietly and without the need for gunfire. No one in the room expected Maya to stand at that moment. She was not required to speak, and no one was there to protect the words she was about to say. But she could no longer sit still. Her wrists still bore the marks of the cuffs, her eyes slightly wet but shining with a fierce determination. Her voice trembled lightly as she spoke, but with every word, it grew stronger, like a small steel cord being stretched taut against a sledgehammer. "I am not guilty." Her voice rang out across the courtroom, making a few people turn in surprise. "I only wanted to help. I teach children how to protect themselves online. I have never touched drugs. I would never do that." Her words echoed like a small roar in a forest of silence. But it was precisely that smallness that made it so sharp. She didn't scream, she didn't cry, and she didn't beg. She was simply a woman speaking the truth with every ounce of strength left after hours of torment by an unjust system. She knew they wouldn't believe her. She knew her words wouldn't be recorded as truth. But she said them anyway because silence now would mean surrender, and Maya Jackson did not surrender. The air in the courtroom froze. The judge was preparing to announce the next phase of the trial when the large door at the back suddenly swung open. All eyes turned. A man in a black suit entered, calm and composed, his face cold, but his eyes burning through every shadow in the room. James Carter didn't need an introduction. He walked straight toward the defendant's table, carrying a thick file and a small USB sealed with the NSA's red stamp. "Your Honor," James said, his voice low but carrying across the room, "I have evidence that must be presented immediately. It will completely alter the nature of this trial." The judge furrowed his brows slightly, but due to James's reputation and authority, he didn't dare stop him. James moved up to the podium, inserted the USB into the display. On the large screen, the image of the white powder bag found in Maya's car appeared, along with the laser-etched code NTX 47K3. James locked eyes with the prosecutor and Hayes. "This is an internal NSA inventory code used for training items. This bag was never authorized to leave the storage facility, and the last person to access that inventory was the police chief in charge of the Harwood County unit." The room began to murmur. James continued, playing internal messages he had extracted. Hayes and Rivera discussing with someone in their organization to set up a subject with too clean of a record to be guilty, but with ideals so strong they are dangerous. A short video clip from a hidden camera gathered by James showed Rivera secretly placing the powder bag into Maya's trunk while Hayes distracted her. The truth was exposed. Before the judge could speak, two federal agents walked into the room, silent and direct, heading straight toward Hayes and Rivera. For the first time, the mocking smiles vanished from the two officers' faces. "Officer David Hayes, Officer Antonio Rivera, you are under arrest for falsifying evidence, abuse of power, and conspiring to cover up organized criminal activity," the agent declared clearly, pulling both officers' arms behind them. The cold click of handcuffs echoed through the room, but this time it didn't tighten around Maya's wrists. The courtroom was silent for a few seconds, then erupted. Some people applauded, others stood up. Those who had looked at Maya with suspicion were now teary-eyed with emotion. Her goodness had been beaten down, trampled by the wicked, but now justice seemed to be bowing in apology before her. In front of everyone, Maya's handcuffs were removed. Her lawyer shakily said, "You are free to go immediately," but the words felt like they came too late. Maya stepped down from the stand, her legs slightly unsteady from the overwhelming emotion. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She simply looked straight ahead at the door where light poured in from a small window above. She walked slowly through the courtroom. The eyes that followed her no longer filled with doubt or pity, but with respect. But in Maya's eyes, there was still something unsettled, an invisible scar, not from the handcuffs, but from the pain of being betrayed by the very system she had once trusted. As she passed by James, he gave a slight nod. No one spoke. They all knew this was not the end. Goodness may have been revived, exonerated, but it still lived in a world where light and darkness struggled for every inch. And in that world, sometimes the good had to roar like a lion to protect what should never have needed protection, themselves. On a typical Monday morning, the sunlight streamed down onto the faded roof of the Harwood Community Center, the place where everything had started. The classroom door swung open, and the children sprang from their seats like seedlings reaching toward the light. "Miss Maya!" The cheer rang out, followed by small feet rushing toward her, wrapping their tiny arms around her slender but strong legs. Maya bent down, hugging each small child tightly, forcing a smile despite the lingering traces of exhaustion in her eyes. None of the children knew what had happened. No one asked. But in the innocent silence, Maya felt something almost healing. She stepped onto the podium, her hand trembling slightly as she picked up the marker. On the whiteboard, the image of the handcuffs flashed across her mind. The cold, biting sensation of the cuff still lingered, an invisible scar. But she stood firm. She wrote on the board, "Protect the truth." The room fell silent. Then Damon, the boy she remembered most, raised his hand and asked, "Miss Maya, will you still teach us?" Maya nodded. "Yes, as long as you still want to learn." And in that moment, she was no longer the one who had been arrested. She was no longer a victim. She was the one sowing seeds of hope, and goodness, though once buried, had been revived right where it all began. That evening, in the security office at Fort Meade, James Carter quietly closed the soundproof glass door and handed Maya a thick folder stamped "Top Secret." She looked at him, her eyes full of caution. "Isn't it over now?" she asked. James shook his head slowly, sitting down. "Hayes and Rivera were just tools. Investigation evidence shows at least 3 people within the Internal Control Department turned a blind eye when the evidence bag was taken. And worse, an underground organization is recruiting people within the NSA." Maya tightened her grip on the folder, her heart skipping a beat. "Recruiting?" James nodded. "They target those who are trusted, influential, and then twist them. And someone like you, who dares to resist, they tried to eliminate." A tense silence hung in the air. She didn't ask who was behind it. She understood that if James hadn't said, it wasn't safe to know yet. But she knew this war was far from over. The evil had not fully revealed itself. And she, the one who had been arrested for her goodness, now understood that goodness, if not protected by courage, would always be buried by dirty hands holding power. A week later, Maya appeared in a short video broadcast on the community media channel where she had once taught. Behind her was the old whiteboard, the yellow light gently casting a glow on the face that had once been tried to be erased by the system. She looked directly into the camera, no script prepared, no speech to read, just speaking from the heart. "I once thought justice was an immutable principle, that if you live right, act right, the truth would protect you on its own. But I was wrong. Justice isn't blind. It's only blinded by violence," she said, her voice steady but with a spark in her eyes. "I'm not the first to be strangled for believing in goodness, and I won't be the last. But if we stay silent, we are complicit in the violence." There was a brief pause before she continued. "I call on those who have suffered injustice, who have been handcuffed for kindness, who have been threatened for speaking the truth, to stand up. You don't need to shout. Just don't bow your head." The camera lingered on her face, fearless, not begging. It was the face of a warrior, and of a lion who had learned to roar in an age where goodness was no longer protected. Thank you for following Maya Jackson's journey, a path full of storms yet illuminated with hope. This is not just the story of a woman wrongfully accused, but a voice representing millions who have been suffocated by a system that should have protected them. Maya did not surrender. She stood up, and she roared, not for revenge, but to awaken, to remind us all that justice is not a gift but the result of courage and unity. If this story touched your heart, if you believe that goodness should not be forgotten and that the truth deserves to be protected, please help us spread this message. Like, comment, and share this video with those who need to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe to the Emotional Journey channel, where we tell stories that stir the soul, inspire change, and reignite faith amidst the darkness. Because goodness needs witnesses, and justice needs your partnership. See you in the next story.